Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another wonderful tasting with the Virtual Tasting Society. My name is Vadim Perlovsky, and today we're excited to welcome one of the oldest distilleries in Kentucky, or one of the first. I know you guys took a little break there, but Amir Peay, I think I said that right, is here. He's revived the Old Pepper Distillery, and he's here to tell us all about it. We have a fantastic lineup of 6 expressions, as we normally do. One of the ones we're tasting today is the new and yet to be released decanter release, but I'll let Amir talk about that one. I don't want to step on any toes, but super stoked. Welcome to everyone here from the group. I think everyone here is a familiar face, so everybody knows what to do. Ask questions, get nerdy, participate. That's what we're here for. Thank you very much for joining us. Amir, thank you for being here with us. We're excited to learn about you, about your brand, and taste some of these whiskeys. Please tell us the background and join us on tasting.
Absolutely. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here tonight with you all. Vadim, I know we tried to get this together for a year, and I felt horrible. We were trying, and we were in the middle of some of these pandemic supply chains, and so as we're trying to put out new whiskeys and new bottles, whether it's glass plants or people or other things, we just kept hitting these delays, and I just was like, I really was looking forward to this so much. And I said, I just would hate to come on and not, like, I knew we had all these great things about to come out. And I said, God, I can't imagine doing this. And then, a couple months later, these things come out. So we kept delaying, and I really appreciate your patience, and very happy that we can have this full lineup of whiskeys, because it is a very exciting time for us at the distillery, and for what we've been doing at that historic distillery for almost 6 years. And what I've spent the last almost 17 years of my life working on. So today, we do have 6 whiskeys to taste through. And this is, please forgive me, everybody. This is a new format for me to do a tasting and a presentation. So if I bumble around a little bit, please feel free to, move me along. Please do interrupt, ask questions. I really much more prefer having a conversation as opposed to giving a lecture. So I really love when people ask questions, and I can do a really deep dive into something that's much more comfortable for me. And again, this is sort of a new format that I'm working on. So we'll see how it goes. But what I think I'd like to do is I'll break down the 6 whiskeys that we're going to taste, and I want to interact, I think, with everybody. So I don't want to, as I said, just give a lecture, but I do have some things on a PowerPoint that I figured I would share. The reason being is that there is such what I think is cool and amazing history to this brand, and the story of the brand history, relaunching it, rebuilding the historic distillery, and then the whiskeys that we make. And it's a very visual story. So I can talk ad nauseum, and I do it quite often. So I do give seminars, and I do a lot of sales meetings, and I've been doing this for almost 20 years. So I'm an old hand at it. But again, I just think that what drew me to relaunching this historic brand was the amazing history, which is very visual, and it's cool to show a lot of this stuff. And some of these things, as I get into it, I'm not sure the depth of, and I'm assuming it's a varying depth of knowledge and understanding of whiskey production and history. And so when I give a presentation or talk, I always try to make sure that I'm saying things that are sort of understandable to a new drinker to whiskey, but also touching on some things that nerds like myself, who want to go to really far out places, can go. And so if you see something I'm getting into, feel free to be like, "Hey, Amir, let's get into that a little bit more." So I think the first whiskey, and we can start tasting, and I believe we have a couple hours in the Zoom. I don't know if we'll need the whole 2 hours. I'm free for it. Again, in terms of time moving along, feel free to interject or whatever, but I'm in no rush. So this is the first whiskey that we will taste. I don't know if my Zoom thing here is going to allow you to see.
The bourbon bottled in bond.
Yes, this is a bourbon bottled in bond.
So we have in front of us the bourbon bottled in bond, the rye bottled in bond, and I labeled those as bourbon bib and rye bib. So the single cask strength bourbon or rye, I decided not to add anything to because I thought sib and bib would be too confusing. So If it just says bourbon, that's the cask strength one. There's also the ABV on there. Should be, everyone got that? That should be easy enough to understand. You're all professionals at this point. I know some of us have 6 glasses in front of us. And we like to pre-pour the cask strength stuff, so let it open up a little. Do you want to just tell us the order we're going to taste in through the night, so we just put them in order and go that way?
Yes, great idea. So first will be the bottled and bond bourbon. Second will be the bottled and bond rye. Third will be the single barrel bourbon, the cask strength bourbon. Fourth will be the single barrel rye, cask strength rye. Fifth will be the decanter. And 6 will be the single malt.
Fantastic. And I mean, I'll ask this when we get to the single barrels. You know what? I will ask this when we get to the single barrels. I'm not going to jump ahead.
Yeah, go for it. But yeah, no, please throw things out. This is how I really enjoy it. And especially as we start drinking whiskey, I really like to chop it up. So, you know, with that, you know, it's Friday night, so there's no need to hold back, everybody. Bottled and bond bourbon. This is aged about 4.5 years old, distilled in spring of 2019. Distilled at the historic James E. Pepper Distillery that you see over my shoulder. This is DSP Kentucky 5. We do, and I will get into detail more the mash bills in our distilling program. But this is we distill multiple bourbon mash bills and blend them together after maturation. So the grains in here are going to be corn, rye, malted barley, and a little bit of malted rye. And then we age all of our whiskeys in very fine cooperage, only Kentucky oak, air seasoned for a minimum of 18 to 24 months.
So none of this is sourced. This is all you guys.
Everything we are tasting is 100% distilled at our distillery.
Very cool. You started out selling some source stuff, right?
Correct. And when I do the little PowerPoint, which I'll open up, I'll show you those labels, the 1776 labels. I can show you one right now that we're really well known for.
Mm-hmm.
People recognize us for these labels. That's what I relaunched the brand under. And, you know, a little background on myself. You know, I'm a guy who used to be I studied philosophy in college, of all things. I spent a lot of years working in bars and restaurants as, you know, a waiter, a bar back, a bartender. I was a much better bar back than bartender. I'm very good at manual labor. And then he lived in, I think everybody here is in California. I was actually born in Marin. And then grew up in New Mexico, Washington, D.C., but went back to school at Santa Barbara. So I'm a Santa Barbara graduate, UCSB, and the majority of my family lives in California, so it's really home to me. After UCSB, I published a little wine magazine there, a little rinky-dink thing, didn't make any money, but really furthered my palate. And so when I relaunched the brand, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, but when I did it, you know, I was then and still am a bootstrapping entrepreneur. And I didn't have the money to build a distillery. No bank would loan me the money to do it. So I had to work with other distilleries. And I did so under the 1776 label. That was something we've always been very transparent about. It's always been on the labels and the websites. And we've always sold those whiskeys at a very competitive price point. And so people always, you know, got a really good quality for a good bang for their buck. But the whole mission has been to rebuild the old distillery and put these whiskeys out. So.
The double malt, maybe. I'm getting a really nice chocolate note, kind of mid palate to the back, which I'm really enjoying. That might be the malted barley. You said 2 malted barley and malted rye, so maybe that's
correct.
I was told to associate malt. No offense, Vadim, with like a malted milkshake, and so I always get a chocolate note.
There is a malty note, and I will tell you, I don't like to tell my tasting notes first because I feel like it, you know, tries to steer the direction. But I will just say this. The malted barley we use is all brewer's malt too, which adds a much nicer flavor than distiller's malt. And the flavor profile that I get from this bottle and bond bourbon and what people who come through the distillery and the tour operation, you know, I don't like the word smooth, but I will say it's a very drinkable. It's approachable, and I don't get this big bomb of flavor on the front palate. For me, this is more of a very easy approach, and then the flavor is in the mid palate and the finish, and it builds. And you get some of those classic, typical, you know, bit of candy corn, you know, bit of oak, bit of vanilla in there. But it is that malt note that really carries through on the finish to me, and adds something unique to this. And what I will also say is everything we distill, we have a very unique distilling program. I don't think anybody is doing what we are doing, and our blending program as well. And let me, if you all don't mind, I know I have a very handsome face, but let me show some of these images because I've got cool stuff, and I think for me to nerd out. Now, how can I share my screen? I can click this little button here.
Yeah, go right ahead.
All right. Everybody can see my screen?
Yep. And you have more tabs than I do. That's impressive.
I'm crazy. I cleaned it up before this meeting too. So, all right, let's see here. All right, let's see. I can put this down here. So, real quick, just to show everybody some of the bottles we're drinking from today. This is the 1776 label that we are most well known for. 76 rye and bourbon, 100 proof, very drinkable. Great for, great price, about $30 on the shelf, great for cocktail programs. There are best-selling whiskeys today by volume. So, I figured we don't need to taste those today. We're going to focus on the Old Pepper label, the Old Distillery, bottled and bond, and the single barrels come in this label here. And then the new release, the Decanter Bourbon, shown here.
So are you discontinuing the James Pepper 1776, or are you keeping that going?
We'll always keep it because it's very near and dear to my heart. It's what relaunched the brand. James used to call the brand Old 1776, but we are evaluating, if we're going to start putting our own whiskey into that package, or continue to work with other distilleries. It's just that the 76 label was founded as a source label, and actually it's always been contract distilled too. And so the consumer, we've always been very honest about it. It's been out there for well over a decade. And so I don't know if the consumer really would recognize or even appreciate if we began to put whiskey from the historic distillery into that bottle. Whereas, and on the other side of it, we're so proud of what we've been doing at this historic distillery that we really wanted to take the opportunity to showcase that whiskey in new packaging. So it's sort of, a tough decision to make about how we allocate these whiskeys. And it's one, unfortunately, every distillery has to make, but to be determined. Let me see. All right, we went through that. Okay, so bottle and bond, here we go. So I have to take a second to brag, as you're going to see here. And this is covering some of the brands that we beat here. But this bottle and bond actually just won a double gold medal at the New York World Spirits Competition. This is blind competition, New York City, one of the most prestigious, some of the best palates in the industry, taste their blind. In our category, we won a double gold, which means every judge who tasted gave it a gold medal. So therefore, it's a double gold, the highest medal possible. And we beat blind some pretty big names, a murderer's row of some Kentucky bourbon names, as you can see down there. E.H. Taylor, Barrel Proof, Eagle Rare 10-year, Weller 12, Weller 4 Wellers, CYMB, whatever that is, a couple of blue runs. We beat them all. We're very proud of that. You can find a bottle of this in a store for $50 to $55 on the shelf in our gift shop. Most of those whiskeys, if you can find them, are well over 100 to 300. So that's what this product we're tasting now. Again, we go a little quick here. I just got to spend too much time in this PowerPoint.
Did you go over the mash bill on this, or will you go over the mash bill on this?
I will, correct, yes. So for now, because what I do is we have a whole program of distilling and blending, and there's actually a chart that I will share with you to show more in detail, because it can be a little complex, I think, for certain people to follow. But the grains that are in here is corn, rye, malted barley, and malted rye, in that order. Production leadership, myself, I am the owner operator of the distillery, sole owner operator. I built this up as a bootstrapping business. We have no private equity or third party companies behind us, and again, I didn't start with any money really speak of. So I'm the sole owner operator. I'm very involved in what we do, the styles of whiskey we make, the architecture of the whiskeys. But I am not a distiller. I can sit down and have a very nitty-gritty conversation about distilling and production, but I'm not a distiller. That's this man's job right here, shown here. His name is Cody Giles. He's our head distiller and blender and plant manager. He's been with us since day one. We filled our first barrel at the distillery in 2017. He's a graduate from the University of Kentucky's Chemical Engineering and Distilling program, and he's been a critical member ever since. That is our still system, which I'll talk a little bit more about as well. So for the production of our whiskeys, just to go really back to the basics, when we look at the key steps in what we do, obviously water is the big component for a distillery, and we use the historic distillery well. Our distillery was initially built in 1880. The Pepper family was drawing water 200 feet below ground. That's where we get our water from. 100% of our corn is grown locally by one farmer. The rye and the barley we source for top quality and flavor from outside of Kentucky. We have tried to grow rye and barley in Kentucky, and we've had a lot of problems. And there's certain reasons. I can get into a whole side note about that. But, again, our number one goal is flavorful whiskey and quality grain. We do a lot of, inspections on the grain when it arrives. And Kentucky is very problematic for rye, and more so even for barley. Yeast strain, we use a historic Shenley strain. Our distillery was a Shenley-run distillery after Prohibition, along with, Buffalo Trace. That was a Shenley plant. We have old production documents from the Shenley plant from the 40s through the 60s, and we used to actually run George T. Stagg bourbon there and others. So we like that strain. And really most of the historic distilleries, the big heritage ones, are using some very, very similar variation of the Shenley, the Seagram's bourbon strains. Key steps, obviously, for bourbon, whiskey, grain milling, cooking, fermentation, distillation, maturation. For us, we on-site mill our own grain. We cook it up, at the distillery, obviously, breaking down the starch into fermentable sugars. We introduce our yeast there, create our distiller's beer, about 10% alcohol, before we send it over to the still. We do classic open top fermenters, as you can see a photo here. And we use, again, the classic Kentucky 72-hour or 3-day fermentation regimen. Any questions, again, please feel free to throw them out, and I'll jump out of here in a couple of minutes and get back to everybody. There's our distillation. That is a classic Kentucky beer still and doubler, basically a column and a pot still. This is typical to what the larger producers and everybody uses in Kentucky. Ours is a little more special, though, is rebuilt working with Vendome Copper and Brass in Louisville, who built the old system at our distillery in 1934 at the end of Prohibition. Bourbon and rye production, straight whiskeys, you cannot distill over 160 proof, although most in Kentucky are coming off at 130 to 135. That is where we come off as well. And for maturation, we are using, obviously, new charred oak barrels, which is a requirement for American whiskey. We cannot reuse them again like others in other parts of the world. We have great extreme weather fluctuation in Kentucky, which is great for the maturation. Very cold winters, very hot summers, so you have a lot of expansion into the oak, and then the winter you get this contraction that comes out. And that hot expansion, contraction over the years in that new charred oak barrel, really, compared to other regions of the world, gives a relatively faster and more quality and in-depth maturation. The maximum barrel entry proof by law is 125 proof. We will go into the barrel as low as 107 and up to 120 proof, depending on the whiskey. And I could, again, talk on a whole other side note about that. Some people will say lower is better. There have been a lot of studies with the cooperages and distillers about what actually gets extracted from a barrel at different barrel entry proofs, actual chemical compounds that have flavors associated with them. So I think really the way you look at it is you get different flavors emphasized at different barrel entry proofs. So it's really about the flavor profile you want for that whiskey. For our cooperage, we only use what we consider as the finest. That's Kentucky oak, air seasoned for a minimum of 18 to 24 months. The average whiskey barrel is air seasoned for about 6 months. And all of our barrels are toasted. And we do a combination of palletized and rick storage. And here is our distilling program that I mentioned. So what we do, we have the actual, like lots of historic mash bills, the actual recipes were run there. And so we do want to produce, some of these historical mash bills, and we do. When we started up the distillery after we shut down for 50 years, we began to use the exact same bourbon mash bills when it shut down in 1967. But we also like to innovate because this is a fun time to make whiskey. And so we're big fans of blending. And what we decided to do is make some whiskeys that highlight and concentrate the flavor grains, or small grains is what they're called in Kentucky. These are malted barley, rye, malted rye in the case of the Old Pepper Distillery, wheat. Again, they're called flavor grain or small grains. Got to have, of course, minimum 51% corn for bourbon. And so we decided to take these historic flavor grains. So we're not using quinoa or buckwheat or anything, strange, right? We're using the traditional flavor grains used at this distillery. And we're making some whiskeys that we call isolated flavor grain blending component bourbons to isolate the flavors of those flavor grains, like 45% raw rye or 49% malted rye or 49% malted barley, to then distill and age those separately. And then at the end of maturation, have the ability to blend them back together. So that gives us the ability to really do countless types of blends, but all with the very traditional profile we want. So to what you're tasting in this bottled and bond bourbon, this is going to have roughly around 20 to 25% raw rye in there. I can't remember off the top of my head the exact one on this batch, but it's around in that part. And then other than the malted rye, which is not as large of a component, and the malted barley, the actual grains and what goes in there is very traditional, right? But it's the way we put it together that's unique, unique to Kentucky. This is not unique to Canada, where they will distill 100% rye or 100% corn or 100% malted barley and then blend them together. And it's not unique, obviously, to Scotland, where they do blending as well. But it is unique for Kentucky. And our initial blends coming out are sort of have a profile that is a little more traditional. But obviously, we have the ability to do some very, very fun and unique blends in the future going forward. Let's see here. Feel free, again, any questions, feel free to shoot them out. All right, I'm going to pop out of this thing for a second and stop this share. All right. So how are we liking the bottled and bond bourbon?
Really liked it. Finished it. Question. In addition to the actual mash bill, did you guys have old samples to sort of compare what it was to what it is? Just because you're sourcing from outside Kentucky, so even if it follows the mash bill, it probably tastes a little different. So I'm just trying to figure out: are you trying to chase that old taste at all, or do you know what it tastes like at all? I mean, I've never tasted.
Very good question. And absolutely. And I'm going to get to that part, and I'll show you some images too. But yes, we built up a very large. I've been doing this for full time for 16 plus years now. And I built up a large collection of original, perfectly preserved full bottles of pepper whiskey from before, during, and after Prohibition to sample and analyze, along again with very detailed production documents, not just mash bills, but actually like cook temperatures, how fine to mill the grain, like thousands of things. Our problem is actually we have too much history and too many materials. By the way, this is the point where we can try the bottled and bond rye. So this is 100%, and I'll keep going on your point. This is 100% rye in the mash bill. The majority is raw rye, but there is also some malted rye in there. 4.5 years old about, and this is going to have, all of our whiskeys are unfiltered. 4.5 years old, spring 2019. So, but yes, we have. And there's so many variables that go into whiskey, and you can go down these rabbit holes and start going, all right, let's really try this whiskey. When you try old whiskey in a bottle, specifically the older stuff, I mean, first you want to make sure there's a good seal. There's almost always gonna be a little bit of evaporation. So then you start to look at oxidization. Is that impacting the flavor? The whiskeys from before Prohibition, the seals weren't as good, and they've been there a long time. And so we've tried them, and some are just not good. And you're like, well, it wasn't stored well. So it's hard to know. I've tried others that taste good, but even when you're tasting something you like, you're like, well, God, is it's very hard to know, like, was that the way it was right at his bottom? Now, the ones from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, I think we're getting a much better idea of what that tasted like. And that's actually where we have much, like literally, I don't know, hundreds of production documents about how they're making it. We actually have grain sources. Again, we have the yeast strains, and those we taste, and we get certain flavors that we could target. And again, things like barrel entry proof, we know things like that. But then when you can get into the flavor of targeting and how you produce that, there's all these other variables. Like, we point out to people, you can take two batches of distillate, put them in a barrel, the same distillate, right? Take that tank, put them in two barrels side by side in the same warehouse, come back 4 years later and try them, they're going to taste different. So it's like, how do you really know? Like, you can go so far off, like, was the barrel aged on the east or the west side of the warehouse? And so when you're asking yourself these questions, you look at the bottle you tried, you don't know. So, what was the whiskey stored in a at the bottom of a valley or at the top of a hill? Like, what kind of rick? I mean, there's so many variables. So I think, to answer your question, what we look at is just say there's a sort of a ballpark profile and house style. And you start with the foundational blocks of that, which is going to be your grain bill, your barrel entry proofs, your yeast strains, and then you can taste flavor and understand and look, and you can kind of go from there. And then you just kind of shoot for that ballpark, right? But we've been fortunate to work with a lot of brilliant master distillers and become friends with them. They talk to me over the years, and they're just like, Amir, you can take the exact same process for whiskey, use the exact same grain, everything, the process, cook temps, all those things, and make it at two different distilleries. It's an identical process, and it's going to come out a little different. You'll be in the ballpark. You can be in a ballpark, but every distillery's got its unique bugs. And so how did the flora and fauna and the air change over 60 years? I mean, there's natural things you're getting in that fermenter. I mean, there's just, again, so many variables. So I think we have the house style, and we just try and target that. Sorry, does that answer your question?
Totally. And it leads to more questions if you don't mind, but like, how much of the footprint are you trying to recreate? Like, is the distillery in the same place? Is the warehouses in the same place, situated the same way, built with the same things? Like, how much are you trying to duplicate versus innovate? Because that's obviously a very interesting tension that you have to sort of play with the whole time.
Well, so that's one of the fun things about blending. We actually have a greater chance of trying to recreate old flavor profiles through blending, right? So, because then we can just say, well, forget what the mash bill, right? Just, we use these grains, have these various whiskeys, let them age separately, and then have this flavor profile from a historic bottle we try, and then we just say, let's blend to hit that, right? Don't get caught up in the details of old document stuff. Just blend to hit that. So we can do that. And then I think, look, I mean, we're pulling water from the historic well. I mean, it's at the historic distillery. We're doing historic barrel entry proof. So I think we're in the same neighborhood, on the same block. But I don't think we really, like, our main goal, we wake up and say, let's make great whiskey, right? And we're having fun doing it. We've got a really great team of distillers and people there, and so we just try to make great whiskey. And again, in that house style, right? In that house style. So that's kind of what we do.
And what made you go after the Old Pepper brand? Like, was there a connection? Is there stories, or I mean, what was it?
Yeah. So basically, like, I love history. I love old brands. And I'll show you a little bit about that in the next, part of the PowerPoint. I think some of this stuff. I'm just sort of a nerd for history and everything. And I worked, as I said, in the wine business and kind of in the food and bar business. And I love old Americana, old brands. I used to also actually cover freelance, be a freelance journalist for boxing. Believe it or not. I was a big fan of boxing, still am. It's the only thing my dad, my brothers, and I watched. We moved around a lot. He grew up watching Muhammad Ali. And so I was one day watching and I'm probably the only person to ever write an article about boxing and fine wine in the same article. And so I was watching a documentary, Ken Burns, Emmy award-winning documentary on PBS called The Rise and Fall of, it's called Unforgivable Blackness, The Rise and Fall of Jack Johnson. It's about Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight boxing champion of the world, who was an amazing American athlete and just American, period. He's only the second American citizen ever to get a posthumous presidential pardon. Just had an amazing story. And after I watched that, I was really fascinated, and I used to, and I still do. I go to the Library of Congress records, and I just like to look at old images and historical things. And I was looking at images of that fight, and I saw this one with the two boxers in the ring, and I'll show you the images in a second. And in the middle of them, there was a big banner. It said James E. Pepper Whiskey, born with the Republic. This is 2007. And I just was like, that's weird. I'd never heard of this brand. Actually, I started working the whiskey business a little bit through an Irish whiskey brand that I had created in a partnership with the Cooley Distillery in Ireland. And so I started to research it. And I just became really intrigued. And by the way, there's a 10-minute documentary on our website that I made with a PBS filmmaker in Kentucky. We have a museum at the distillery. And I tell people, I say, all the things you'll see in that documentary in our museum, 16 whatever years ago, I didn't go when it was all in one blog and it was like, oh, copy and paste, like, let's go. But I found little bits and pieces. And what I saw was that this is arguably the oldest whiskey brand in American history. And if not Kentucky history. And it was just an amazing old brand, an iconic brand. And I just couldn't believe that it had been abandoned, forgotten, and nobody knew about it. And I'm sitting there in my little 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment going, broke, going, God, it'd be really cool to relaunch this brand. What a cool story. Nobody knows. And acquiring the rights to the brand was the easiest thing I did because no one knew about it. Nobody cared about it. And this was before the whole bourbon thing took off. So I set about just trying to relaunch this brand, and wasn't some slick, sophisticated business plan. I wish I could say, I thought this whole thing through from day one. No, it was kind of a pipe dream that I just kept going through and having fun, and I've been doing historical research for 16 years, which I've discovered the majority of the stuff. We continue to make new discoveries, and it's just it's fun. I enjoy it. I get to drink whiskey, talk about history. And there's so many. I'll get into history now. You got me going. So let me get into the history part. All right. How's everybody liking the Bottle and Bond Rye? Any thoughts, flavors, notes?
I found real classic rye notes, but like the bourbon, very, very, very drinkable. And I mean that in a very, very good way. Easy to drink. Would probably do well in a cube, which I like, but with neat was not a problem at all. I really liked it.
Awesome. Yeah,
I liked it as well. It kind of threw me for a little bit of a loop because I was tasting like a chocolate covered cherry with a little bit of like an almond type of glaze on it. It was just different. I mean, just that strong cherry note coming through for me, and that's different, I think, considering it's a rye.
Yeah, I got a chocolate peppermint note. Okay, cool. I'm gonna share my screen and show you some history. All right, I'm back in here. Let's see if this opens on the same page. No, but I'll go quick. So yes, Bottle and Bond Rye, that's the one we just drank in there. Got a very nice review on the Bourbon Life podcast. So to get into the history, here's an old 1940s Life magazine ad showing a scene from the American Revolution and talking about the origin of the Pepper family whiskey brand. Again, arguably the oldest whiskey brand in Kentucky history, founded during the American Revolution by Elijah Pepper, who is grandfather to James Pepper. And in 1812, Elijah built a distillery in Versailles, Kentucky. And that property today goes by the name of Woodford Reserve. It's a little craft whiskey brand. Has anybody heard of that brand? Yeah, just a little startup. So anyway, that was founded by the Peppers in 1812 by Elijah Pepper. And then Elijah passed away and his son Oscar Pepper took it over, hired a Scottish chemist by the name of Dr. James C. Crowe, if you've heard of Old Crow whiskey. Together, they perfected the sour mash process for making whiskey, which revolutionized the whiskey industry in the mid-1800s, created consistency and quality from one batch of whiskey to the next, and really made Old Pepper and Old Crow the first brands, like actual brands, going from a commodity to a brand of whiskey. And it was a favorite whiskey, and they used to sell it by the barrel. And again, this was the Old Pepper Distillery. And it was a favorite whiskey of Ulysses S. Grant and Andrew Jackson and Henry Clay and many others from that era. And then when Oscar passed away, his son, James E. Pepper, took over the distillery. And when he was 15 years old, actually. And he was so young when he took it over that the family said, hey, you need some help. This is a pretty big business. So we're going to bring in an old business partner, family friend, to help you. And actually he became James's legal guardian. And that guy's name was Colonel E.H. Taylor, which I'm sure many of you have heard that name. So he helped young James, advised him to expand, actually lent James money to do that. And when Taylor and James Pepper got into financial difficulty, Taylor ended up having to foreclose on the distillery. And that's how the Pepper family lost that property. But all the historic buildings at Woodford Reserve today were built by the Pepper family. Now here's James E. Pepper, Colonel James E. Pepper, shown in the 1880s or 1890s at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City. Again, he was the third generation to produce Old Pepper whiskey, which he promoted as the oldest and best brand of whiskey made in Kentucky today. We shortened that to Kentucky's oldest brand on the label. And again, when we say brand, we're not saying distillery or distiller, we're talking about brand. And he used to put that on his labels in the 1880s, 1890s, oldest and best brand made of whiskey. So what's a brand? It's like a trademark, or it's a brand name. And again, and I'm very, thoughtful. I try to be very thoughtful about how we talk about the history and some of the things that this family and this brand did. And I'm ready to have this conversation with a room full of very serious whiskey historians. Again, I think the brand has this claim to make it because, again, we're talking about a brand. But anyways, he continued to use his grandfather Elijah's original Revolutionary War recipes. For that reason, he nicknamed his brand Old 1776. That's why we have that on those labels today. He was a horseman of international fame. He had the finest thoroughbred horse stable in Kentucky. They raced in the Derby, the Oaks. He would even race in England, once beating the King of England in the Doncaster Cup in England with his horses, and brought the trophy back to Lexington, Kentucky, and it's at the Horse Park Museum today. And so he was very famous as a thoroughbred horse racer and from his whiskey brand. The old-fashioned cocktail, legend has it, was invented in his honor by a bartender at the famed Penn Dennis Club in Louisville, and then he introduced it to the world during his stays at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in Manhattan, the famous Waldorf, the old Waldorf in the 1890s, turn of the century. And he was the first distiller in Kentucky to bottle his own whiskey at the distillery, and he was also instrumental in the implementation of the Bottle and Bond Act of 1897. And I really highlight these two things because there's such a great, rich story about James E. Pepper and the Pepper family. But why was he so important to the American history of American whiskey and the history of Kentucky bourbon? And I think it's these last parts here. And I'll show you a couple of old historical images that highlight this thing. So in the 1880s, it was actually illegal for a distillery to bottle their own whiskey at the distillery. They were required by law to sell full barrels to rectifiers who would then bottle off-site. And this drove a guy like James E. Pepper, and actually E.H. Taylor as well, crazy, because they were producers of high-grade whiskey. And in the 1880s and early 1890s, there was no law that actually defined what whiskey was, what bourbon was. There was actually no consumer protection law for anything. So he had to sell his barrels to rectifiers who would then take his whiskey and adulterate it. They would mix things in or cut it down or do what God knows what. And this drove him crazy. He wanted to control the quality. So he actually had to sue the state of Kentucky to change the law to allow him to bottle his whiskey at the distillery. And he was so proud of that. If you look at these old images, this on the left is an old advertising board from the 1880s that's at our distillery that's hanging on the wall in the museum, and an ad on the right. And you can see the red on the label where he shows proudly distillery bottling, because it was a huge advent. And all the other distillers rushed in and began to do that as well. But then another thing continued to happen. People would just take his bottles and refill them. And again, there was no consumer protection law. Trademark law wasn't strong. And so this really drove him crazy. And people were doing really foul things. So he had this really ingenious idea. He realized that the one strong law back then was forgery law. So he said, I'm going to print a little strip of paper. If you see on the bottom here in the left corner with his signature on the strip, and it says signature strip label. And I'm going to seal this over the stopper of my bottles. And I'm going to advise consumers, beware of refill bottles and do not buy it unless it bears the following unbroken signature across the stopper. And if somebody knocked that off, he'd sue them for forgery infringement. And that became so popular that other distilleries began to implement it. And then in 1897, when the Bottle and Bond Act passed, now this was the first law that defined the standard for American whiskey. And to this day, it is arguably the highest standard of quality for a brown spirit in the world. And it really defined what bourbon was and straight whiskeys. And, when they passed this law, James E. Pepper and E.H. Taylor were the two big proponents, the two distillers who wanted to get this passed to protect the quality of their whiskey. And when it got passed, and there was a lot of opposition, when it got passed, the federal government loved his invention so much that they took it and adapted it into the tax strip stamp. So whenever you see those old 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s bottles with that tax strip stamp over them, and even bottles to this day from all these other brands that have that strip over the top, that tamper seal, this was all from the invention of James E. Pepper. And that's why today, we make the Old Pepper label. We have his same signature on there, and it's bottled in bond. And some people say, well, what are you, James E. Pepper, you Old Pepper? And like, well, it's confusing. I say, well, you know what? It is what it is. There's a lot of history. We want to honor it. And when you look at this label, the Old Pepper label, we feel like we need to honor that and his contribution to the industry. And that's why we do it. And let me see here. I'll go to the next page here. So again, as I said, I'm very thoughtful about talking about these things in this world, because there's a lot of, how do you say, can I curse on this? There's a lot of bullshit in this industry, right? So here's a little bit of information talking about the Bottle and Bond Act of 1897. So one interesting thing about this, as a side note, is this is not only defined the standard for American whiskey, but it was the first consumer protection law for anything ever passed in the United States. So before, as a country, we decided that we needed to make sure the food was pure or the medicine was pure, we said we need to make sure the whiskey is good in this country. And as you see here, the opening passage is from Wikipedia, where it talks about, the idea behind it was to create the standard of quality for bourbon whiskey, and that prior to the passage, much of the whiskey sold as straight whiskey was adulterated, flavored, and colored with iodine, tobacco, and other substances. And then below this are a couple of quotes from Michael Veach, who is lives in Kentucky. He's a Bourbon Hall of Fame author and historian. I would argue he is the preeminent bourbon historian in the world. And here's a couple of quotes from him about the Bottle and Bond Act. This was a controversial piece of legislation opposed by many rectifiers. The two sides of the argument included E.H. Taylor Jr. and James E. Pepper, who argued on the side of straight whiskey producers. And further down, he talks about the Bottle and Bond Act of 1897 created a whole new market for bottled whiskey by separating straight whiskey from blended whiskey in the marketplace. And each Bottle and Bond's tax stamp seal was an adaptation of the seal James E. Pepper created to seal his bottles against tampering. The tax stamp also gave the consumer valuable information as to where and when the whiskey was made and bottled. As a result, drinkers gained confidence in the quality of the whiskey that they were buying. So, I put a lot of thought, and these are the reasons why I was so captivated with the brand. Here's a very famous old book, The Waldorf Astoria Bar Book of Classic Pre-Prohibition Cocktails. This was printed in 1934 at the end of Prohibition. This was, 1935. This, to this day, is one of these classic bartender Bibles where, bartenders will look at this for all these old recipes they're making, around the Prohibition era. And as you can see on the top page, for the old-fashioned cocktail, it tells the story of James E. Pepper bringing this to the Waldorf and introducing it to New York City, and it being introduced, or created at the Pendemis Club, and the recipe there, which, by the way, that we only make one cocktail for the distillery. It is the old-fashioned, and we do the old-fashioned according to this recipe. It's really good. There's an old New York Times article there talking about him entertaining people at the ballroom in the Waldorf. We have over 100 New York Times articles. Oops. There is the Jack Johnson image, the fight that I mentioned. There he is on the right, challenger Jim Jeffries on the left. July 4th, 1910, the fight of the century. There was a banner that kind of got me into the brand. They actually did it. Now they sponsored this fight, and they released about 10 images from the fight, from like the weigh-ins, throughout the fight, the knockout. And I have originals of all of them. And the next one I'm going to show you, I think, is my favorite, and I think I have the only original in existence. And it's Sunday, July 3rd, the day before the fight, and there's the champ, Jack Johnson, drinking Jamesie Pepper whiskey. So I always thought that was kind of funny. It's like the breakfast of champions before the big fight. He's drinking. And really a remarkable thing about this sporting event, the history of the brand, among many things, is that they actually sponsored Jack Johnson specifically, not just the fight, not just Jim Jeffries, but Jack Johnson. And if you watch that documentary, you understand sort of how remarkable that was. All right. If you want to watch all the history, again, on our website is a 10-minute documentary. I made it with a PBS filmmaker in Kentucky. I think it's pretty cool. There's a lot that I'm glossing over here, but you can see a lot of that stuff there and more. All right, now we can get into the bottled and bond, excuse me, the single barrels. So I would go to the single barrel bourbon next. Pour this one out. Any thoughts, questions on all the history?
So two questions on my end. Was he actually a military colonel or like one of those Kentucky colonels?
He is a Kentucky colonel,
What
like
is a
myself.
Kentucky colonel?
I actually became one recently last year, and it was
Congratulations.
one of the best days of my life. And I sent a note to every single person in my family, and I kindly requested. I said, "This has been a great honor, and I really appreciate it going forward. You'd all just refer to me as the colonel, you know, and in the third person. So like if it's my birthday's that week, and say, oh, it's the colonel's birthday coming up this weekend, and no one replied to my email, and I'm yet to be called the colonel by anybody, except a few people in the whiskey business who hear me tell the same story, and they'll entertain me. So, single barrel bourbon, these come out pretty low, low proof. So because the early years we're going even lower, 107. So I think we're at about that for the proof on there.
Why do you focus on the label? Obviously focuses on showcasing that it's a single barrel rather than showcasing that it's barrel strength. Why was that choice made?
So it does say barrel proof on the label. On the neck strip, it says right there, barrel proof. And we have, handwritten there, the proof itself. And it does say here. So a couple of places it does say barrel proof on the label. But, it is not much above 100 proof. So really not far above, bottled and bond. And I think, I'm not sure, it's an interesting question. Actually never came up in any of the design stuff. I think when we look at design, you're dealing with limited real estate and how you want things to lay and how you want the eye and people to take it in. And you sort of prioritize things. And, I'm not sure how some things just come out a certain way. So.
What is the entry proof?
So for this one, there's gonna be 107. We started to go up to around 110 on some of our bourbons more recently, a couple of years back. We have sometimes you lose proof. You don't always go up in proof, and you can actually have whiskeys go below 100. We bottled years back. I did a 15-year-old 1776 rye that was bottled about 94 proof, cask strength, 15 years old. So when you're wanting to have a whiskey program that allows you to do bottled and bond, we thought we would be safe at 107, and we liked that proof. And then we started to see some going down in proof. We're like, we got to up this up a little bit so we don't have some problems. And 110 is a nice historical marker used at our distillery. And again, when we look in historical provenance, you could go back to Jamesie Pepper's era where there was, or even Oscar Pepper, when they're selling by the barrel, going in around 100 proof or 102. And we had those historic entry proofs too. But again, that's different eras. So anyway, there's almost too many choices in history, but that's kind of where we've ended up.
That's interesting because it was high for a while, but now like the trend with a lot of new guys is to go that lower proof. It's which I for whatever reason I tend to like a lot of single barrels that are lower in proof, but were lower proof in entry because there's flavor for what it is, and I think this definitely carries through. Like it doesn't taste. I mean, obviously it doesn't taste hot, but it doesn't taste like we're missing anything. It's full of flavor. It's
really interesting. I think cooperage is a big part. Additional air seasoning is a big thing of what we do. I think that gets us a great, flavor profile. Independent Stave has done a couple of detailed studies with, I think, Maker's Mark and Buffalo Trace. And I have these charts, if everybody would want to see one, I could send it to you, where they would go and they would take distillate, they put in the barrel at 100 proof, 110, and 120. And then they mature the whiskey and they do chemical analysis for like, I don't know, 15 or 20 different compounds. And all these compounds have different flavors like vanillins and, sugars, extracts, and other things like complicated chemical things that I don't even know. I'm not a chemist, but I took that chart and I modified it because all those different extractions, those chemical compounds have flavor notes, have flavor components. Some is like lactones and like coconut notes or vanillins or sugars, or like cloves type notes, mint notes. And it's really interesting. You get different levels of each at different barrel entry proofs. So to what I was saying earlier about what we go in for, and it's like, if you want to get the most vanillins, you want a vanilla note, 110 is the best for that. If you want more sugars, 100 is the best for that. There are certain compounds that have these sort of minty cloves notes. 120 is better for that. So do you want more of a spice complexity note? Do you want more of a vanilla note? Do you want it to be lighter, sweeter, smoother? So I wouldn't say one is better or worse than any of them. I just think you get different compounds. And we like 110 because you get like sort of a good range of everything. But, and then there's so many other factors that go into it as well, along with, air seasoning for the oak, is your barrels toasted, your char levels, other things like that. Any notes anybody's getting from this single barrel bourbon?
How consistent are your single barrels?
I would say they vary a bit. Now, we're in this ballpark, but we have done, and I'm not sure how much y'all looked at that flow chart I put out about what we distill. We do a lot of experimentation and variation, and especially the first 2 years. Now, what I mean by that is we do it within a set of defined sort of parameters, right? So certain grain bills, certain grains, certain ranges, but we like to experiment. And in the beginning, we really like to do it. We almost did it too much, and we've dialed it in a little bit more now because you got to track all those things. And once we kind of dialed it in, we kind of found the lanes we want to be in. We still do experimentation though. And so I think there is these whiskeys where this was the first, we started production in 2018. We started in December 2017. So really 2018 was our first full production year. What you're tasting now is 2019. In the second year, we're absolutely doing it. We do crazy things like, again, we use brewer's malt instead of distiller's malt for our bourbons. We do that because there's a nicer flavor to it. We found a note in an old Seagram's book, The Fundamentals of Distillery Practice, published in like the 1940s or 50s by Seagram's, who was the best distiller for American whiskey back then. And today, anybody I've known distillers from Seagram's are brilliant people. And that's a gift a brilliant distiller gave me when I first started building this distillery. We poured over it, and there was an old note in there saying, hey, if you can use brewer's malt, do it. It gives you better flavor. It's more expensive though. So we're like, all right, we'll do that. But then we didn't just do that. We said, well, what brewer's malt? So we would bring in brewer's malt. We'd bring in Golden Promise from Scotland. We tried 3 or 4 different, malts from different regions of the United States. We distill them individually as single malts and then in bourbon mash bills. And we do them in the, with 12%, we do them with 49%. So, you kind of like get in these things and you go, all right, but then we dialed in and we picked one we wanted to, because some of that stuff can go, off the rails. But yeah, so to your question, Vadim, there is, I think we're always gonna be in a ballpark. We've got a house flavor profile, and we're not going to go vary from this. Like, we've never made a weeded bourbon because it wasn't, although they did make it once there, but it wasn't historically what the flavor profile, the house style of this distillery. So everything we're doing has got a house style to it, but within that, there's variation, if that answers your question.
So what's your view on innovation then? Are you going to, your plan for now is to stick to historical roots, or are you planning to go wild?
Well, I would say wild. I would say that we have 1 or 2 things we've been having fun with for a few years that we're not going to announce yet, but we think it's exciting. And again, everything we do is rooted in tradition, right? So you're not going to see a quinoa whiskey from us. You're not going to see a buckwheat whiskey from us. It's all rooted in tradition, but we innovate off of that tradition. And I think the one thing that we have that is unique, again, is these different bourbon mash bills that we distill in-house, that we're going to blend them all together. So to my knowledge, yes, a number of people have made bourbons with 51% corn in it. We're not the first one to do that. But to my knowledge, I think we're the first one to have a distilling program that thoughtfully separates out each of these flavor grains specifically for the purpose of blending them together at the end of the rainbow. That I don't think anybody's really done a program like that in-house. And again, what that allows us to do is take all those whiskeys and put them together in a more typical profile, but also put them together in a profile that could be a little bit out of left field, you know? And when you think about the amount of blending options we can do, I think we have the ability to do really endless number of innovative blends that are very unique, but again, kind of rooted in tradition.
Thank you.
Sure.
The mid palate on this bourbon is just so spicy. I don't know if anyone else was getting that.
I wanted to back up a hair. I was going to ask you this question earlier, but you got into history and I was too enchanted to listen to go backwards. You said when you blend, are you aiming for like the best flavor you can get out of the barrels that you have available at the time? Or are you trying to go for the same flavor profile each time?
So what we're really trying to do now, and again, you know, to put in perspective where we are, all these new things just came out in the last few months. So it's been this fun ride of tasting things throughout the years, and waiting and you know, oh God, we put it out right when it's all 4, we wait till it's 5, and how do we do that? And then there's a lot of pulling samples and drinking these straight and pure, and then a lot of experimental blends. I'm very involved in the architecture of them. Cody, our head distiller and blender, is as well, but he also executes the blends. And what we do is we just try a lot of different things. And I think we go into it with a clear mind of just saying, like, we know what all these components are. We know what they taste like individually. We've tried different blends with different ratios. What do we like? And this is what we do on a tasting panel. And we go in with an empty mind to say, let's just make what we think tastes the best. And that's where we go. You know, with every decision we make is about the best flavor. You know, we don't want to be limited by anything. Like, we want to be inspired by history and tradition. We want to honor it. But every decision is about making the best whiskey we can make, right? So that's like the question of like grains, you know, and you know, to the thing I was talking earlier about growing, you know, grains in Kentucky. Like we grew 100% of our corn there. We grew rye the first year, and it came out really nice. We made rye whiskey with it using some of our bourbons. The second year, the crop just failed. So like, okay, you know, Yorkie one farmer, that sucks. Like, it failed. No, now what do you do? We can't get rye from Kentucky. All right, well, for consistency, that's not a good thing, right? Barley, we grew a crop one year, and we knew barley would be even harder to grow in Kentucky. But we worked very closely with the University of Kentucky. They have a great distilling program and an agriculture department. We talked to them about barley varieties that would grow well in Kentucky in that humid environment. And they were like, well, there's this one strain that we think could do well. And we worked with the same farmer. We harvested 100,000 pounds. We're going to use it to make a Kentucky single malt, and to put some in our bourbon. We sent it to a malt house. And the maltster called me up and he said, Amir, the barley has some mold and fungus on it. He said, if this was the typical barley we would get in from another farmer in the West, where all the barley comes from, he said, we'd reject it. If you want, we'll malt it for you, though. Well, you can make whiskey out of it, but we'd reject it. I'm just telling you. So we rejected it. You know, we said, no, the number one goal is make flavorful, high quality whiskey, right? That's the goal. And that is number one. But the parameters under which we do that is honoring the tradition and sort of the house style, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. And blending is really, there's a great old quote. I think it was from one of the guys who founded Seagram's, you know, distilling is a science and blending is an art. And it really is. Distilling is really technical, scientific, very mechanical. Blending, boy, you tweak 5% of something, it's just amazing. Or you will take 3 or 4 whiskeys that on their own, you're like, these aren't really doing anything great for me. You put them together and you're like, what? This is amazing. Like, how did this come together like that? And so you kind of just got to get in the lab and just play around to see how they come together. Yeah, so it's an interesting process. It's a fun one, though. We're about 1:06, so we can move to the single barrel rye if everybody's ready for it.
Same entry proof for the rye 110.
We started out this one is going to be, I should know this. It's either going to be 110 or 115. We've actually gone up to 120 in the last couple of years. Again, for the rise. Reason being is we like we've always been kind of known as a rye house, especially through the 76 line. And as I was talking about those flavor notes, those sort of cloves, complex eucalyptus notes that come from a little bit of a higher barrel entry proof. Our ryes we're very drinkable. We want that, but we also wanted that to be like, have guts, is one distiller put to me. We wanted it to feel like you're drinking rye. And, and so we kind of inched it up a bit. But this was definitely not put in at 120. This was going to be, I would say 115. It might have been 110. I think 115. And again, very drinkable. I think a big part of the profile for the rye we make, why it has a flavor, is very drinkable, is the rye that we use, but also the process we use, the cook temperature. So we only cook it up to 145 degrees Fahrenheit. It's an old Seagram's practice that actually came over from the old Lawrenceburg Distillery in Indiana, today known as MGP. They use that was an old Seagram's distillery. And they use the old Seagram's process, and rye, you can get all the starch and sugar out of it at a lower cook temperature than corn, and preserve more flavor. So corn, you got to go over 200 degrees, and you'll sterilize the mash when you do that. For rye, you can do it at 145 degrees. Makes it much more tricky for fermentation, because the lower you cook it, the greater the chance of bacterial contamination. So it's really a tricky process, but the flavor that results is very nice. And people are always shocked. We get a lot of people. This is why we love the distillery, the retail shop, the tour operation. We have tens of thousands of visitors come through on the Bourbon Trail. We're the #1 rated attraction in the city of Lexington on TripAdvisor. And we have all these whiskeys out there, and we just love, it's like a little lab. You see what people like and how what they gravitate to and what their questions are. And we get this all the time where people go, I'm not a rye drinker. I'm a bourbon drinker. I don't like rye. And you'll ask them, well, what's your favorite bourbons? And I'm like, well, this or that. And you're like, all right, well, those are all high rye bourbons. But anyway, you say, well, just try it. And they always go, oh my God, I never taste rye like this. I try rye; they're always hot and spicy, and I'm like, okay. I hate the word spicy for rye. I'm like, this is not hot sauce. I like complex, vibrant eucalyptus, but you get that, and people go, it's not hot, and then they go, this is really, there's a sweet note to it, and it's very drinkable. And then we tell them it's 100% rye, and they go, what? It's 100% rye? Like they would expect it to just be like a punch in the face. But I think, again, the grain we use, the process we use, the cooperage as well, barrel entry proof, all those things have a factor in it. So it's very, very drinkable. But still, you get that complexity. We like rye. I mean, even off of the still, when you try rye distillate, 100% rye, it is vibrant. It is complex. I mean, I could drink raw rye distillate like people drink high-end Blanco tequilas. I mean, it has that level of complexity there right off the still. Corn-based distillate, it can be sweeter, it can have some nice things to it, but it's a little more rough around the edges for me, my opinion, when I do it. But rye has this complexity, this fruit. And that's actually why I think rye, you'll find a lot of people will say it matures at a younger age than bourbon, right? Like corn just needs more time in the barrel. And you give it that time, it does some beautiful things. But there's this fruit, this spice in rye that shines at a younger age. Oh, look at this. Here's a poll coming up here. All right, I just saw that. Sorry. What is my favorite? Can I check all 4 of those?
You got to pick one.
This is like asking a father to pick who's your favorite child. This is being recorded too.
It's anonymous, so you're okay.
Okay, I still close it out. I couldn't answer that in good faith. Well, people come up, it's funny, they come to me all the time and they go, all right, what's your favorite whiskey? What's the one you drink? And they're like, come on, just tell me. And I'm like, you know what? I like them all. It's just different. It's like, I drink different things on different occasions. And I said, I really enjoy whiskey from all over the world. Some nights I feel like having a big peat bomb, a peat from somewhere, Ardbeg or Lagavulin or something. Other times I want something a little lighter, or it's something in a cocktail. Am I having a cigar with it? And look, if I'm on a hot beach somewhere in a tropical place, I'm not having any whiskey. I'm having a cold beer, so it's really like, I drink to it all. And people say, what's the best whiskey on the table? And I go, what's the best flavor of ice cream? There's no right answer to that question. It's about personal preference. And I think the company you're in, the food you're eating, the environment, and then you kind of, at least for me, said it like that.
You're absolutely right, unless there's cookies and cream.
I'm sorry, unless there's
cookies and cream. That's the best.
Cookies and cream. Oh, well, okay. All right. We're going to go in a whole other here. I'd love to see people debate the best ice cream flavor.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
Jordan's going to come out with some funky flavors. He goes to like weird ice cream shops and.
Well, you just said mint and chip, super weird. It like came out. I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I said. It's all the things I said.
So what are we thinking about the single barrel bourbon and rye? And do we have favorites between the 4 we've tried, or is there any results on the poll?
There are results in the poll. I think everyone has voted, and you refuse to weigh in. And the results agree with me. The rye is the single barrel rye is the winner.
Wow. Very interesting. And nobody picked the bottle and bond rye. It's so interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you got one vote, your favorite one out of those 4. So, and to me, I will agree with the majority. I don't get to vote, but I agree with the majority that this one really blew me away. It's so interesting. It's got a nice velvety mouthfeel. It's got everything I look for in a whiskey. It's got complexity. It's got sweetness. It's got a little spiciness.
Yeah. It's really interesting too. I find that people gravitate, when you work in the industry, or if you're like a real serious connoisseur, our palates tend to get a little beat up over time. We gravitate towards bigger, bolder flavors. I think rye is just, there's so much complexity there, so much going on. Whereas I think
that's a good, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. No, I was just going to say that I agree totally that it's very complex and you just keep thinking and thinking about it. I ended up opening a 72% dark chocolate to see how it would taste with it. And it just like, boom. I really like that, that combination, but it's just very good.
Awesome.
Please insert chocolate into your CD slot and upload for the rest of us. Go ahead and print it.
What's a CD?
You're right. Into your floppy disk drive, please.
Now, the other thing,
Zip it.
It's interesting when we do the tasting panels, we all try whiskeys. And I don't know if you all have ever had any of the experiences, but like, if I take the first sip of whiskey I take in a day is not the same as the 10th sip, right? Or the 5th sip. So if we taste a flight of whiskeys, I always have to come back to the first one after I'm on the 5th or the 6th one. Cause I go, it's not fair. I'm gonna say, of course, it's better or whatever, but like, it's just a different set of circumstances. So I always want to come back to them and go around, kind of run the gauntlet. And then, I start thinking too much and I go, yeah, but now it came back around. So first it was the first sip, and now it's the sip after the 6 or 7 other whiskeys, and did get a fair shake. And the other thing that I found and we've found is like that you will try one bottle of whiskey. Like you'll have a bottle in your collection or something. And you go, wow, this is my favorite bottle. You'll drink it one night and you're like, God, this is the nectar of the gods. And then you come back to it the next weekend, that same exact bottle, and you try it and you go, ugh, like what is, what's going on here? And we just think it's like, look, I mean, is it the barometric pressure? Is it what you ate that day for breakfast and lunch? Did your, significant other yell at you in the morning? Like what are all the things that like go into that? And so we'll actually take a whiskey and say, we don't have an opinion, a fully formed opinion until we've tried the same whiskey at least 3 different times on 3 different days to really make sure we have a well-formed, opinion on it. So a lot of weird things go into, I guess, this business, trying to figure it out.
We did a tasting with Suntory a while back, and they mentioned that I think it was the master blender for Suntory eats the same breakfast and has for like 20 years. It's like cold soba noodles every day for like 20 years. Does not drink coffee, does not eat garlic to not mess up his palate, like just very Japanese.
We talk about that at the distillery. We say nobody has a meal with hot sauce. You can't come do something for it. If you want to be on the tasting panel, we take it very serious. We just say, look, I mean, we don't get too into telling people what to eat, but we just go, if you want to be on the tasting panel, we're all serious about this. So nobody goes and eats like, a plate of nachos covered in jalapenos and hot sauce before they come in here. Like if you want to be on it, you got to take it serious. And these things can absolutely impact it. I mean, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I went to a tasting last year with Shane, and they were pouring right before they started pouring the $300 bottles. They brought out the food, and all the food was spicy, like all of it was spicy, with like Indian spices. And every single person in the room was like, "Well, now I can't taste anything. Great, thanks."
Yeah, and whiskey, really, I mean, especially compared to beer and wine, like you really need to watch what you're eating with whiskey. It's different. Whiskey dinners are different. And so, for me, at least, I'm wanting things that have a high fat content, obviously sweets or cheese, that's easy, right? Chocolate, cheese, steak. I mean, things just that are more, rich and coating in your mouth than things that are acidic or spicy. But not everybody gets the memo. All right, so we can look at some more history stuff on the PowerPoint if we want, and we can keep sipping on these single barrels. All right, let me do for that.
I think I just pulled a Jordan on this rye. I do apologize. Matt not usually one to finish a sample. Freaking Jordan, he's a bad influence.
I finished all the samples, but it is what it is.
It is Friday night, so all right. So where do we leave off? We were on, here we go. So now we'll talk about the distillery in Lexington. So that's our distillery there in the 1880s. This is downtown Lexington on Manchester Street. At the time, it was said to be the largest, most technologically advanced distillery in the United States. You can see the train station, all the horses and buggies coming and going. It's quite the operation. We had a lot of cool things. We were looking at the history of that distillery, things like these old Sanborn maps. This is an old insurance company that used to do detailed maps of buildings and distilleries all across the United States. And for distilleries, they would do these site maps. This was ours. We have from the 1880s all the way through the 1960s, I think. And they would really do a lot of detail on the production equipment and the layout of the production equipment. And you can see it all here, and this one was from the 1890s. So pretty cool stuff. Now, the old distillery that James E. Pepper built in 1880 was actually burned in a fire in 1933 at the end of Prohibition. And then it was rebuilt that same year, steel frame construction on the exact same footprint. And that's the building that we're in today. So exact same footprint. There it is in the, I think, 50s or 60s. That's what it looked like after it was abandoned for 50 years. It was abandoned, shut down in 1967, abandoned for 50 years. That actually makes it look pretty good. If you walked around the back of it, the place looked like Chernobyl. It was in such a bad state of repair that the city of Lexington, and we're like pretty much right downtown, they wanted to tear it down, and they actually got estimates to do it, but it was so expensive to tear down that they they left it up, thank God, because the place was built like a brick shithouse. Not a single load-bearing walls, all concrete floors, some places 6 feet deep, masonry walls, and then steel beam construction. The steel beams, you saw them in one of the prior pictures, they were all from Bethlehem Steel of Pennsylvania. So again, I talk about, I love Americana and old American brands. Well, these same steel beams went into the Empire State Building, the Golden Gate Bridge, just iconic stuff. And we're thrilled that they didn't turn it down. So even though it was really beat up, and all the copper, everything had been scrapped out, the bones of the building were really strong. And today, you know, we're in the heart of what's called the Distillery District in Lexington. So it's actually, the core of it is a 25-acre property that was the James E. Pepper Distillery, and various other buildings. We're in the historic distillery building proper, running the stills where the old stills used to run. But, you know, if you go on the other side of this building, when I was first there was no parking lot, there's no patio, there was nothing. If you go there now, it's a thriving entertainment district with lots of cool stuff to do. That's our distillery today. If you drive down Manchester Street. So it looks pretty good with some paint, new windows on it. We are DSP Kentucky #5. That is, I'm not sure if I touched on, I think, did somebody ask about that? Did I talk about the production license? I think I did. But we're the 5th production license issued in Kentucky history. It was initially built in 1880, in operation until 1967, abandoned for 50 years. We're now, again, the #1 rated visitor attraction in the city on TripAdvisor, which is the 2nd biggest city in Kentucky. So we've got a very cool tour operation if anybody's ever on the bourbon trip. When we rebuilt it, we had a lot of really cool things we acquired over the years. One of them being the mechanical engineering plans of the old still system built there in 1934. You can see this is one of those images showing the still and the doubler. So we were able to look at all these things as we were rebuilding the still system that you see right there. And that was built, the one prior was built by Vendome Copper and Brass. So Vendome is a family-owned company in Louisville. They make stills for everybody in Kentucky. They've been doing it for, I don't know, 100 years. They were almost put out of business by Prohibition. You can see on the top is a manway cover from the old still at our distillery in 1934 that they built. So I went to them with that manway cover and those old plans and said, hey, you guys built a still for us 100 years ago. You want to build a new one? And they were pretty, you know, thought it was a pretty cool project. So we built this very cool still system, kind of inspired the layout and design, the manway covers, which are now glass. So you can see everything going on by that old still system. We had a lot of old documents, letters from James E. Pepper, production documents, all these things. There you can see a letter on the right-hand side dictated by James E. Pepper. Lots of cool stuff like this. The letterhead is beautiful. That letterhead on the right from 1894, they had gold foil on it. So it was really remarkable. I think that's why James E. Pepper went bankrupt twice, because he liked to spend money on things and horses. And hundreds of really detailed production documents from the 1940s to 60s from when it was a Shenley plant. So again, you know, specific mash bills about, you know, the grain components going in there, grain sources, but also detailed instructions about, you know, the cook temperatures, the process for that, yields, you know, per proof gallon yields per bushel of grain, just really, really wonky stuff that we can get into on old production process, barrel entry proof, all those kind of things. Oh yeah, here, as I said, you can see when we were making, you know, George T. Stagg at the distillery, that was from 1961. Again, we were a Shenley house, they were a Shenley house as well. And a big collection of bottles. So these are all in a chronological order. Just kind of cool to see that you know, progression and to sample those whiskeys over time. We've got a much bigger collection than this. At this point, I've got, you know, triplicates of everything. You know, this highlights sort of the evolution of the bottle and the labels from the late 1800s to the 1960s.
That decanter looks familiar.
You're about to see it and drink it. And there you go. So that is where we introduced the barrel proof decanter bourbon. This was this old decanter. I always loved this bottle. Actually, if you look, I'll show you real quick, the Vendome still. If you look at our little pot still doubler here, we had it designed to replicate sort of that decanter. I just thought it was the most classic and sort of timeless, looking bottle from the old distillery. And so we had a great company in France scan it, recreate that bottle, and we just released it a couple of weeks ago. People really love the bottle itself, but the whiskey is very nice as well. And so we can try that now. Let me stop this share. The whiskeys in the bottle for the decanter are about 5.5 years old. Nothing's under 5 years old. It is all bottled at cask strength. I believe what we are trying is a 52.7% alcohol, so about 105 proof at cask strength. And I would say, yes, average age is 5.5 years.
And it's like a small batch done at cask strength. I mean, differentiating this from the single barrel. Let's see, single barrel.
Yes,
but
this is a batch. This is a batch of multiple barrels.
is there a relationship you guys have with like the original owners, family, descendants?
So James E. Pepper and his wife Ella had no children. So there is no descendants direct from James E. Pepper.
It's just like seances, or
I'm sorry?
it was a joke. Seances is how you talk to dead.
Oh no, no.
Jordan,
But-
they're related in spirit.
Related spirit, but we have had an interesting story a number of years ago. The great niece of Ella Offutt Pepper, James's wife, who was an amazing woman, an amazing story. We talk about her in the Distillery Museum. If you watch that documentary, you'll learn about her. I think she might have the best story of all the Peppers. Her great niece came into the distillery and was so thrilled, so happy that we were telling her story, that she donated all these personal artifacts to us. Because her aunt never had any kids, and James died pretty young and she never remarried. And so we were donated personal mementos of her, furniture of her, and then personal mementos from James E. Pepper that she had inherited. So photographs of them, love letters between them, James's wallet with his logo in the billfold, all this really cool stuff. And she told us a lot of really cool things about Ella as well. So, that was, I'd say, the only interaction we've had. Anybody who's really, I would say, a direct descendant, but a familial connection. I have had some people come to me and say that they're direct descendants, and I just don't want to, you don't want to tell somebody you're not, but it's okay, well, it's very cool, all right, but no, they didn't have any kids and he died in his 50s, but no. So we just got a lot of proud people in Lexington, I think, who really love, and this is the fun thing about the project. I obviously was really drawn to the history of the brand. I thought it was a remarkable story, in Kentucky bourbon, but American history. And then what really made the project special was working to rebuild the distillery in Lexington and seeing how proud people were of the city, that distillery, and the history, and we're as much about Lexington as we are about James E. Pepper. And I think when you look at what's going on in the world of bourbon and whiskey in Kentucky, Louisville and Bardstown get a lot of the spotlight, but really Lexington is part of that golden triangle, if you will. And we're sort of putting, fighting the good fight to get Lexington its due as a great city, which it is. It's a really great, vibrant city. It's the horse capital of the world. It's where all the thoroughbred horse farms are. Great restaurants, hotels. It's an hour away from both Bardstown and Louisville. So it's and all the distilleries those three cities make a triangle, and they're all an hour apart. So it should be getting its just due in terms of the bourbon trail and the history of Kentucky bourbon. And this brand and this distillery really are the anchor, I think, for some of that. And so we're very proud of that. And we're very happy to be a part of it and kind of share this story that people love. And I think that's the story is what touches so many people who come through that distillery and take the tour. And that's why they leave such glowing reviews. Part of the reason.
So as far as the cancer release goes, it's more of a focus on the bottle or the liquid, or
are we more focused on the liquid is our primary focus always. And this is, I would say, our older stocks. So again, average age is gonna be 5.5 years old. It immediately became the number one selling item in the retail shop. Obviously, the bottle is very beautiful. Really highlights the color of the whiskey. It's got a really great ruby color on it. And yeah, I mean, we're always about the whiskey first. So this is suggested retail price is $65. We've been to a few whiskey festivals and showed it some partners, and everybody sees the package, tries the whiskey, and they can't believe it's not $150 on the shelf. But we've always, from day one, sort of our DNA is to, you know, we take a lot of, we really appreciate when people like our whiskeys and plunk down their hard-earned money. So we want to give people a good bang for their buck. And, you know, we feel like 5.5 years old, you know, cask strength. We put a lot into the inputs, but more importantly, we really love the flavor. So we were really, really happy with the way that this came out.
That's a great deal. Is that going to be available outside the distillery?
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is nationwide, rolling out.
Okay.
So yeah, we plan on having this as an everyday item. This is not going to be a limited release. We plan on doing this as an everyday item. And this is really where we're going to be showcasing our older stocks as they continue to age. You know, we're letting some go older and longer. While whiskey's turning 6 years old in December of this year. So we'll be showcasing older stocks here, as well as maybe more interesting blends. So I think that's kind of where we might play in a little bit of, you know, of that space.
So
Not
what-
that
Cancer
not
Kettle-
that
Go ahead, Jordan.
not that age statements mean the beginning and end of anything, but as you get older, we strive to do age stated releases or
Sure.
like,
I mean, yeah, I think so. Bottle and bond, you know, obviously you're saying right there, minimum 4 years old, just by putting bottle and bond. For the decanter, we did not put an age statement on it. We're saying in all the promotional materials, and we, you know, it's so new, we haven't even had a chance to put on our website. You know, we're gonna have, there's a batch number, we're gonna have details about the blends and the ages of the whiskeys in there. I'll be honest, we didn't put a 5-year age statement on this because we were experimenting with different whiskeys in the blends, and we were contemplating putting some 4-year-old whiskey from one lot that we really liked. Because the truth of the matter is we've tried 4-year-old whiskeys that taste better than 10-year-old whiskeys. I mean, and you really, yes, you need some age on bourbon, right? I mean, you need some age. We like some age in there. We like them really 4.5. There's something, not even right when they turn 4, but like get a little bit of extra season in there, 4.5. They start to come into something. So we like age, you know, we're going to go for more age over time. But we don't want to be limited by it. You know, we want, again, goal is the best tasting whiskey. So for some of these blending component whiskeys, again, if you're looking at something that's got like a very high percentage of rye in the mash bill, you might like it as a blending component at a bit of a younger age, where that fruit and that spice shines more, because the older it gets, that fruit and that vibrant flavor is going to die down. And then that sort of rich barrel character will take over, which is very nice. But from a blending component point of view, if the other majority of the whiskeys in that blend have more age and have more of a rounded, sweeter, you know, oak in that profile, more vanilla, you might want to cut that with something that just adds a dose of complexity. And that might come from a 4.5-year-old whiskey. So we really just take, with the decanter, we just take everything we've got, you know, over 4 years old. So it's now a range of whiskeys 4 to 6, and we taste and we experiment. And for this one, it just ended up that at the end of the rainbow, we liked a blend best that had everything over 5. And that's what we went for.
So, how much rye is in this? And I'm getting some tobacco notes as well. Just very interesting, to the nose.
Yeah, I think that this is, again, the feedback we get, and my take, it's again, very drinkable. You get some of these classic caramel and a marzipan note, some tea notes. Tobacco, I think, is a great note. You know, herbal. There's some complexity, some unique notes in there. And so, sorry, what was the question? Oh, how much rye? We're going to have about close to 30% in there. And some of that's going to be malted rye, although it's a smaller component.
I got a really interesting note of corn silk in the sun on the nose. kind of followed by a buttered corn on the cob on the palate. So it's just, I really got a huge hit of that. I did get a few other little notes, like there was just like this tiny little bit of lemon underneath it. It was the weirdest thing to pop out. But I just thought this is fascinating. It's so interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, it definitely has some complex flavors in there. I think some unique, complex flavors. And this is not your typical standard bourbon. You know, we're again playing with some traditional things in there, but the way we distill them and blend them together in the cooperage profile, they're different. And so you are going to get a different profile here, you know. So people are coming and thinking, well, I'm thinking, you know, that very classic vanilla bomb up front or this and that. I think it's different. So it's, yeah, the complexity I think is there. And some of those notes I think you described are spot on.
As a side note, I was looking on my browser trying to see who close to me would have this. And all I kept finding was shopping things like find a 1950s James A. Pepper decanter on Etsy for like $25. I'm like, what?
Yeah. So unfortunately, our California partner has not, they've not picked up their order yet. So it's so new. It's just a couple weeks out. And so we couldn't even, actually, when we sent you all our sample, it was a tank sample. That's how, like, we were just to the wire. I was like, with Vadim, I was like, God, we can't postpone this again. We got to do it. But man, I want the decanter sample there. And so I was telling the team, I was like, God, you got to get it. You know, we're telling the glass company, when's the glass company? I just said, well, all right, just we're going to blend the barrels, you know, and we'll take out the tanks, out of the tank. So you all got a tank sample. Now we do no filtration in mill process, and there's obviously uncut, so it's no different, you know. Yeah, it was right out of the tank for you all. So it literally just came out in the gift shop a couple of weeks ago, just in time for the opening weekend of the Keeneland races here in Lexington, and yeah, it immediately became the #1 seller in the gift shop. People are just really digging it. So yeah, if you like it, just it shouldn't be hard to get. You know, we're bottling up a fair amount, and you know, it'll be coming out, and you know, all the key California retailers should be getting it. And I think just if you have a favorite store, just ask them, and you know, they should be able to get it.
Who's your distributor out here?
We work with well, it's Wine Warehouse, now Breakthrough. Yeah.
Oh, Breakthrough. Yeah. So yeah, Mr. Bartlett is a great friend. He's the one that introduced us.
He's the one that introduced us. So yeah, get Brandon, tell Brandon, send him emails. I won't put his personal email address out here, but
he's in the group. We'll tag him.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, he's in the group.
So I'm actually in Texas. So am I going to be able to find this in Texas?
Absolutely. We have a order and delivery getting ready to ship to Texas. It may have already left. A number of our whiskeys are in specs and other big retailers, so you know, it shouldn't be hard to get there.
Does the same apply to Minnesota?
We are in Minnesota.
Okay.
Yeah, but I can't remember off the top of my head. I don't think we've shipped anything to that market yet. I think we have the same partner in Illinois, and it goes from Illinois to Minnesota. So it's
Minnesota.
What was that?
We're waiting for it to stop snowing in Minnesota.
Yeah, it's not the best time to launch a new release in the industry. This is during the middle of OND, October, November, December, when everybody's just insanely busy. And we've had a lot of delays on this product because of the bottle and some of things. So, you know, our distributors are all very excited. Everybody I've sent a bottle to is really digging the whiskey, and I'm getting a lot of texts at like 9 p.m. on Saturday nights. You know, it means when your distributor's drinking it, you know things are being well received. But you know, these are all pretty large companies. They've got to there's a process they've got to go through and get it in. But I think that they are ordering it, and it will be coming out, you know, probably, you know, over the next few weeks. So
two things. One, it's very impressive that you guys are making a craft spirit at an affordable price. We've tasted a lot of craft distilleries, and a lot of what we've learned is because of scale, because of they can't get the pricing down.
Yeah.
You know, you're paying $100 for a 3-year-old bourbon a lot of the time with craft, and you really have to commit to supporting them at that price. So it's really impressive that we're able to get this beautiful glass decanter for $65, like you said. So I'm looking forward to putting one of those on my shelf. But the other thing is, I stumbled upon your Instagram while on your website right now looking for the decanter. And why is your merch not on your website? These crystal glasses are ridiculous with the cut bottoms. Oh my goodness.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're a small outfit. We don't have teams. The funny thing with us, we've never had a salesperson or brand ambassador other than myself. And we have a lot of people working the distillery, a lot of people working the retail tour operation, back office people. We've been fortunate that the whiskeys tend to sort of sell themselves. And we're just a scrappy operation because that's what you got to do when you're kind of bootstrapping. And so unfortunately, sometimes things fall through the cracks. Like we should have merch online that we're selling. I think we all wake up every day and we're super busy and scrambling around, and certain things we don't get around to that big brands do. Sometimes we get people who call us and they go, "Can you please connect me to the PR, the media department?" And it's like, "All right, hold on one second. Hi, this is the media department. How can I help you as PR?" Like, "Hi, my name's Amir," and I might be the janitor one day, or CEO the next day, or whatever. What do you need? I'm brand ambassador today, so. But we're working on it. We'll get them up. Yeah.
Who's ever doing your Instagram is doing a great job. Those photos are top notch.
Awesome. I'm gonna let the team know. They're gonna be happy to hear you say that. Yeah.
And I keep scrolling and scrolling. They've been doing it for a while. That's really well done.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Yeah.
As someone who tries to do social media and hates it and is not able to do it well, I'm impressed.
Well, the fact that you say it means a lot, because we've felt like we've dropped the ball a million times. It's really like it's a big commitment to do it, and to do it well and to stick with it. And so, it's a baton that's been passed around a few times, and I definitely wasn't good at it. I did it for a minute and it was like, I can't do this. I'm not. I got like 10 thumbs on my finger, and I'm just like, this isn't working good. So yeah.
The thing with like Instagram and social media, in my opinion, is kind of like the way Jordan says, it's a moving treadmill all the time. You always have to be on it, and it's just
it's exhausting. I think what we've done, we just sort of said, look, we're not trying to have the most crazy, like we're not doing reels, we're not doing all this production. We just said, here's the narrative, here's the things we touch on, and we just keep it compartmentalized and just keep it in that lane. And if we commit to that, then we'll be good.
Awesome. So we tasted all the bourbon and rye. And
we can go now. Yeah.
Jordan's favorite part of the night.
Single malt.
Oh, single malt. Let's do it.
Let's go. So this single malt is really an interesting one. And this is why I was like, all right, let me just save this for the end. So we really love single malt at the distillery. You come into our lab and you open our locker up, you're going to see a bunch of bottles of single malt from all over the world. Malted barley has always been a part of Kentucky bourbon, so to isolate it and make 100% version is not like some crazy thing to do. We experimented with lots of different barley varietals, as I said, Golden Promise, a number of other ones, and a little bit of peated barley. And we use different cooperages, yeast strains, and for the most part, a classic Kentucky regimen. So we just do a lot of experimentation, and every year we do it differently. We just although we're dying in a little bit, we don't make a ton of it either. And so for this release, what y'all tasting is age over 3 years old. So it's the youngest thing we've tasted all night. But the thing about barley is, malted barley distillate, it's a very delicate distillate. And when it touches new oak in the kind of weather you get in Kentucky, it ages quick. A lot happens in there, and it can go too far, too quick. So we do used cooperage, new cooperage, different char levels, and just kind of experiment a little bit. And then again, we use a little bit of peat. So we blend, with the peated whiskey, we distill 100% separately. So like everything else, we play around with blends, and the blend we put together uses different barley strains, different cooperages, and about close to 10% of peated barley in there. And so for me, when I drink it, you get some of those classic bourbon notes from the vanilla, from the new charred oak barrel influence and some color there. But you get this kind of grassy, fresh cut hay note from the barley distillate. And then the end, you get this smoke that if we didn't tell people there's a little bit of peated whiskey blend in I think people might think it's the char, or the character from the barrel. But no, it's from the peat, and it's lightly peated, and that's obviously an acquired flavor. We like peated whiskeys at the distillery, but we know that a lot of people don't. And so it's pretty popular. People like it at the distillery.
I would wear this as perfume. Oh my God, it smells so good.
Awesome.
Now, granted, it's a waste of single malt to wear it as perfume, but it smells really good.
It's very aromatic.
It's interesting because I really like it. I find it very approachable. I want to taste it at barrel strength also to compare it. That being said, I do really like it. Normally American single malt this young, I find it to be too grassy, not aged enough. But I see what you're saying about temperature, the terroir of the area. But yeah, it's not enough corn, as Vadim will tell you. I'm a corn guy, but it's doing it.
I think we like traditional single malts. We weren't trying. I think you see some craft distilleries who really go out, and it's admirable, but they will take kind of wild stuff that brewers use, like chocolate malts and all these things, and they want to really do that. We just want to use more classic malts. But then I think the cooperage and the climate really is what makes it a Kentucky single malt, and adds a little bit of that Kentucky note there. And we've learned a lot of lessons through this process about single malt distillate and new cooperage, and versus used cooperage, and what we like, and this and that. And so it's not really. I would say everything we do, you see from single malt. Again, we're gonna have a house style, we're gonna have a ballpark, but there's gonna be a variety. There's gonna be changes to profiles. We're moving around now. We're in a pattern, so to speak. But we're starting to learn what we like more and where we want to go in the direction more. And it's not too far from this. I mean, we think that we want it to be identifiable with what people like about single malt, right? What their understanding of single malt is. But at the same time, we want to have a little bit of that Kentucky fingerprint on it. And I think you get that with with some new cooperage in there. And then the maturation in that climate, with these extreme summers and that expansion, and then the really cold winters, that has an impact as well. So
I blame Jane because she didn't remind me, but I do want to take a quick photo of everyone here. Usually she's on this, but she's not on it today, so that's Jane's fault. But I do invite everyone to raise a glass. I hope they're still
Lost in the single malt. You'll have to forgive me.
I know, I will, because I'm enjoying this as hell too. So cheers, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. This is not working. 1 second. Oh gosh, 1 sec, sorry. Snipping tool is not working with me. It hates me. There we go. We're back.
So bad at this.
All right, everyone, raise a glass and smile to the camera. Awesome. Yeah,
wow,
this is fantastic. Amir
made it almost 2 hours. Time flies when you're having fun, having a good conversation, drinking good whiskey. So
I'm really impressed with your single malt. This is as everyone here will tell you, I'm more of a malt guy. I'm the yin to Jordan's yang.
At least that's what I saw scribbled on the bathroom of my high school bathroom.
Jordan, why are you still going to the high school? That's weird.
That's where I hang out sometimes. I can tell you.
You're gonna edit this portion of the recording now,
I
right?
have to.
The single malt I'm getting, initially when I smelled it, I guess that's not a good, maybe nosed it. I got a lot, that I don't know what it was. It was like and I don't know, like a lemon ginger at the initial. And I don't know, I'm not sure. I'm not even on. I don't even know if I'm on target really. But I had that lemon ginger heaviness about it. That kind of threw me a little bit. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
I've
There's
learned over the years that, and I love single malt, and I have learned that brands that tend to use only new American oak tend to create a single malt that's a bourbon drinker's malt, and I don't like it. And I like Scotch style single malts where they use ex-bourbon casks. And so if a brand is using, like you guys are using both, so I'm really enjoying this. Versus there's been some where I was like, we had a brand that we tasted that everybody on the tasting loved the single malt, and I'm like, I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't like it. And what the hell is it? And Jordan and I sat down. We literally as a group were going to do a barrel pick of it, and it hit me. And I was like, he doesn't, he's a bourbon guy. I'm a malt guy. And he's like, this is the most amazing thing ever. And I'm like, you like it because it has the complexity and awesomeness of being a single malt, but it's bourbony. That's why you like it. And I don't like the bourbony part.
interesting.
You ruined the good thing. So
Yeah, we tend to lean a little bit more towards the used cooperage. New oak on single malt distillate. Again, in our climate, it can be aggressive and it can be too much. We've had to take whiskey out of the barrel because we don't like the direction it's going in. It's just a very delicate, flavorful distillate. And that's what we found with any kind of malted distillate is that it's got a ton of flavor coming off the still, but it's a delicate flavor. And so it seems to do a little bit better in used cooperage. But we again, this is where blending comes in. You have some whiskey that's in new oak. It gets some of the color, it gets some of that body, it gets some of those vanilla tones. And then, you might not like it on its own, but as a blending component, it's amazing how things can come together, right? It's amazing. You can try things individually that you're not like, just not digging it like this. You put it together, and it just does something special. So.
Yeah, blending is definitely an art. I do have to stay in touch with you. Let's make sure we keep in touch because I can't wait to see where your single malt goes. That's where my heart is at. So if you toss some of that in one of your rye barrels and then pull a sample, please tell me. Or what are your plans? What are you most excited now that the decanter? I know that was a pain in aside.
Yeah,
getting that glass. I know you've been working on that for a year. What's next? Are you going to finish things? Are you getting some sherry casks? Where are you headed? What are you most excited for?
We've done some finishing in the past. We might look at doing a little bit of it because it's fun, but really for the most part, we're really interested and focused on the grain program and the distillates we produce and what we can do from a blending point of view with all of our own in-house distillate. And that's really what we're starting to showcase in the bottled and bond items in the decanter. So I think that's what's most exciting to us. Along with stocks getting older, right? Having whiskeys that'll turn 6 this year. And then having products that we've made, experiments, limited things that we've just forgotten about. We haven't tried things for a couple of years, and we're just like, hey, we know the distillate was great. It was great at 2, 3, let's just check it in 2 years. So we've got a really nice catalog of barrels coming along, of very unique things that we think were really well made. And so just letting those come of age and blending them and doing it under this program. And I think we've got some cool things up our sleeves. And I think, at the moment it's the decanter, it's our oldest stocks, what we think is the best blend of them. And again, very unique whiskeys that you're just not going to find anybody else who has a whiskey with this profile being made in Kentucky. And we're really, really happy about it and happy that we can get it out there and share with everybody. Happy and consider ourselves fortunate that you all took the time to try these whiskeys and hear the stories. So this is the fun part. I don't get often to do this. Usually I'm sitting at a desk doing paperwork. So it's a lot of fun, for me to get to do this. And I really appreciate everybody taking the time to try the whiskeys and hear our story. And hopefully, you know, I can see you out in California or see you in Lexington. We'd love to see you all at the distillery.
Thank you, Amir. We really appreciate it. What's some of your older stock of the single malt? Like how old is older stuff?
We began making single malt year one. So we have single malt that's 5 years old.
Wow.
Not a lot of it, but we have some. And, you know, we honestly are just so busy bottling and staying on top of our core stuff and these new kind of core expressions that sometimes, yeah, we have things and we just don't have the time to get to it. And that's okay. That's the beauty of the whiskey business. Like, hey, there's nothing wrong with letting it go from 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 and 8 and 9 and 10, you know? And so, yeah, we've got some really fun things in the pipeline. And I think over the next year or two, we have done some pretty cool, you know, innovation and some things that I think people will find very interesting. Again, you know, all rooted in tradition, but I think pretty innovative and pretty unique for what's going on in the world of whiskey.
And I know I keep harping on this because I really liked it. What's the entry proof and what's the barrel proof on these that you're making a small batch at 100?
Sorry, the
He's talking about the single malt. He's only going to talk about single malt.
Single malt. Barrel entry proof on single malt, low, although we have started putting some in higher. I think we started out lower on pretty much everything, and we're starting to
110,
107, 110. But you know, with used cooperage, there are some schools of thought that say a higher entry proof is going to extract more flavor from a used barrel. Mm-hmm. And you know, the other thing about higher barrel entry proof that a lot of people don't talk about, there's a flip side of that coin about going in lower. When you take new make distillate off of a still, it's very flavorful. It's not bland. It's not like it's water. It's like there's flavor in there, right? So if you dilute it and then put it in the barrel for lower barrel entry proof, like you can never get back what you've diluted, right? So sometimes going in the barrel at a higher proof, like you're going in at a higher proof with higher amount of flavor, right? Like water is not adding flavor. It might be diluting it and creating different complexities. So I think that's one thing people lose sight of with barrel entry proof is, and again, this isn't a knock. We do low barrel entry proofs, and I think there's beautiful things that happen if you go in as low as 100. But there's also something interesting about a whiskey that's 120, 125, even some of these hazmat whiskeys, you know, George T. Stagg, 150, whatever, out of the barrel. And you can only get that, you know, and so again, you take it off the still at 130, 135, there's a lot of flavor there, a lot. You can't go in the barrel that high. Max is 125, but that's an interesting other side of the coin to look at. And so again, I think we have what we do as a core program, which is lower barrel entry proof specifically on bourbons, but for other things we do some experimentation.
Cool.
And I think I'd like to see where you head with your ryes. I love the decanter, but the rye, something about it is just very intriguing, and it brings me back, you know, continuously back to the rye. I'd love to see it, you know, where you go on a higher proof. Just curious about that.
In terms of like a cast strength or like.
Yeah, just a little bit higher than what we tasted today. I just think there's so much in it that keeps you going back to thinking about it. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a great point. And to that point, we started out lower barrel entry proof on the rise and we've gone up. And I think typically now we're at 120 proof going into the barrel on our rise. Again, that's not all of them, but for the majority. And it's for that reason that we like the complexity and we like what is extracted at a higher barrel entry proof as that, and how that plays into the profile we want to get out of the rye, which has just we're going for that complexity. We've always been known as a rye house, even before we rebuilt the distillery. You know, I relaunched the label under that 1776 label, working with the Lawrenceburg Distillery in Indiana before MGP acquired that distillery even. So that's how long I was working with them. When their parent company was in bankruptcy in the Caribbean. It was just a different world. I had to harass them to work with me. And one of the reasons I loved them, you know, was that I knew his ex-Seagrams. It was a great distillery, very high quality whiskeys. You know, it's in Indiana, but it's literally in the banks of the Ohio, opposite Kentucky. So just for all intents and purposes, it's the same geography. But also really because James E. Pepper used to make a pure rye whiskey, a 100% rye whiskey, which is very unique then. And at the time, now there's no one thinks twice about a whiskey with 95% rye or 100% rye. But when I began working to relaunch that, nobody did. There was no craft distilleries. That hadn't happened yet in the country. And nobody in Kentucky was making a rye whiskey with anywhere near that percentage. Pretty much everybody had about 40+% corn in the mash bill on their rye. So at the time when I found that distillery, like, it was very unique and it was very flavorful. And it was historically the old style that James E. Pepper used to make. So we loved it for all those reasons. And we've always carried that through into what we do today. So we're very partial to rye as a pure expression, but also in our bourbons too.
Amir, what do you think was the favorite expression of the night?
Well, I'm just gonna go on a limb here. I know, well, I'm not gonna say I know what my favorite is, but I would just say, based on the way everyone's been talking and drinking, I'm gonna say it's the single barrel rye. But maybe the decanter, maybe that was the dark horse and it came up.
All right, results are in. Decanter took first place.
Oh wow, look at that. All right. Well, that
There you go.
I'm not surprised, and I will just tell you why. We have in our retail environment, our lab at the distillery, it's really like we put all the whiskeys out there, we give them all equal attention. And I constantly talk to the people working the retail tour guides. I'm like, what do people like? What are their favorites? What are they buying more? Like this and that. I want to know. And the decanter has just been on a tear. And people really love the whiskey. And I personally love going to trade shows and festivals and events and just seeing people drink through our flights, and they have just been on this decanter. So it's been great to see, and very happy to see that as well. But again, they're all fine whiskeys. They're all fine flavors of ice cream. It's to each their own. So you know, if somebody likes the single barrel rye, the barrel proof, more power to you. If you like the bottled and bonds, easier drinkers, more power to you. And if you love the decanter, that's great. We love it too. And it's coming hopefully to a store near you. So.
And the cool thing with the decanter is today's tasting wasn't influenced by the bottle. Everybody's bottle was exactly the same.
I love it. I love it. That's great. No, I love it. Blind is the way to go. Or no bottle. Yeah. Not blind.
That was absolutely delicious. I mean, I was really impressed with all of these. So thank you very much for spending the evening with us and finding the time for us. This has been really a treat. And we look forward to having you back again sometime in the future, talk about your new releases or visiting you in Lexington or welcoming you here with open arms in LA if you come out, or Minnesota or Texas or Florida.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation, Vadim. I'm so happy we were able to do this after a year back and forth, man. This was a lot of fun. You all are a great group. And yeah, I look forward to doing this again online or, you know, in Lexington in person or out in California or Minnesota or Texas. But thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you.
Awesome, Amir. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night. Cheers.